Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have two members of the House of Delegates from the Virginia Beach area with us. Delegate Jason Miyares, good to see you, sir.
Thanks, it's good to see you, Woody.
Delegate Kelly Convirs-Fowler, good to see you.
Good to see you as well, thank you.
You're one of the newer members of the General Assembly, and first of all, I want to comment, we certainly have a wide variety of ethnic groups represented here, as well as diversity of opinions. So tell us a little bit about what's going on outside later on today. I know you're a former teacher, and you have to be excited about teachers being here in Richmond.
Absolutely. It is great to see all the teachers come together and to get together for the same cause for education. And they are here today in Richmond. It's I know it's Wear Red for Ed Day, and so you see a lot of red around the Capitol. And they are coming to bring those issues in education to light, and they'll be all around the Capitol. I've already seen a lot of them. So,
a lot of educational issues over the last few years, still here as we converse today. How are schools doing in your school district?
Well, Virginia Beach is blessed with having a fantastic school system, one of the best, in my opinion, in the country. And I think so many of us that get involved with public service, there's a variety of reasons, but almost all of us have a similar story of a teacher at some point in our life inspiring us. And I had that going at Salem High School back home in Virginia Beach. I'm sure Kelly as well has stories of teachers that really inspired that spark in history and government, and that was one of many reasons, but that was one of the reasons that propelled us. So we gave our teachers a pay raise last year. I'm sure we're going to be able to find a way to make sure they're properly compensated, because they have such an enormous, I like to say, generational impact, a multi-generational impact on people's lives. And we have some of the best, I think, in the country in Virginia Beach.
Now, as a former teacher yourself, you're well versed in whether teachers have the resources they need. Salary is great, increase there, I'm sure is well deserved, but what about resources?
Absolutely, that's one of the other issues that we have to look at. And we have to look at efficiency, we have to look at, I think the teachers need to be able to teach. I think we all agree that we need to be efficient with our use of money and the budget, and kind of give the freedom to allow teachers to teach and for schools to do what they need to do. And I remember teaching, and I taught at Lynn Haven Elementary, and I taught third grade before leaving teaching. And there was a smart board, I remember, and those are $10,000 plus. And in our copy room that was never used. And I remember telling the story, and I kept thinking, we had to use it in our budget, we had to use it, but there's got to be a better way to utilize that money, rather than think smarter, rather than just utilize the funds just to use them. So things like that, we need to kind of be listening to our administration, our local school boards, listening and getting the input into what we spend our money on and the resources that are there.
And of course, Delegate Miyares, our schools are all things to all people now. There are many more social ills in society, unfortunately, that come to our schools. There are a lot of children at risk, and there are fewer psychologists, mental health experts, and nurses who are there to support teachers.
It is really hard for teachers, because right now they have children coming through those doors, some of whom come from absolutely heartbreaking backgrounds of broken homes, of parents that suffer with addiction problems, or children that are in the foster care system. And they wear so many hats. They're not just sometimes teachers. They're sometimes serving as a confidant and a counselor. And so giving them the resources they need, I think, is going to be absolutely critical. I'm a product of Virginia Beach Public Schools, elementary school, middle school, and high school. as is my wife. And so I know how much a teacher can literally change the life trajectory of a child, and I think it's critical they have the resources they need to succeed.
And our kids are subject to a lot more crime. I know you have some legislation dealing with human trafficking.
I did. That is a kind of unknown for too many people crime that happens in our community, particularly in our hometown of Virginia Beach. It's somewhat transient, and it's a tourist town as well. And whenever you have kind of a larger area that also has a lot of out-of-town visitors, unfortunately, you also have human trafficking that happens kind of in the shadows. And it is utterly heartbreaking. You talk to anybody that worked either with the Butterfly House or Seton Youth Shelters or the Judeo-Christian Outreach Center that deals with young runaways. So often they have essentially been captured into this dark, evil world of sex trafficking or human trafficking. The stories are utterly heartbreaking, but there's a host of legislation we've been trying to tackle in Virginia on human trafficking. My most recent bill that passed with broad support, bipartisan support out of the House, and it's in the Senate, and my expectation is it will get to the governor's desk to be signed, is it puts the national human trafficking hotline in all of our ABC stores and our Virginia Employment Commission stores. And I'm in constant communication. I've talked with some great folks in the hotel industry that are doing some of their own training. I think next year we need to look at perhaps a budget amendment allowing the state police to partner with some of our friends in the hotel industry to help train the clerks, because sometimes they are at the front line of the telltale signs of what it looks like. But the horror stories are horrific. I know that the Virginia Beach Police Department is actively at the oceanfront trying to combat this, but this is, in my opinion, this is essentially human slavery. These are young kids. Oftentimes they pry them with drugs and addiction, and they literally are just slaves to the person that is running them. And it's so getting them out of there, letting them know there are people there to help you, that will protect you, that can save you, I think is just going to be critical fighting this awful scourge.
And Delegate Convirs-Fowler, if you haven't observed this yourself personally, I assume your spouse has, because he's in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he has. So there's a lot of this that goes on, and you'll hear about it. I've had constituents reach out where they were approached, or their daughter was approached. There's a couple different places that I know of, like in Walmart. There's some different places where they will be targeted to kind of get them in, if they look like loners, to kind of get them into the crowd. So it's just really, it's all on the education side. It's something you don't hear about, but it happens so often, and it's such a huge issue that I'm glad it's coming to light. And so the information presentation, I think that we talked about before, that I kind of bring to the table as an educator, is where my focus is. So that having that hotline, that availability, that information out there for people is key. So.
Virginia Beach, Tidewater suffers from a lot of different issues. Transportation, for example. Sea level rise, I believe, is a big problem there. Talk to us about that.
Well, I've got some legislation, and I know Delegate Miyares has as well in the past and now, about anything we can do to kind of deal with this issue of sea level rise with flooding. We've got different reasons in Virginia Beach why we flood in the north, different reasons in the south, and then some overall problems. And I'm in real estate now, so I actually have a different perspective that I can bring to what we need. And when we have so many new families coming into our area with the military, that we have people buying and renting houses if they're not living on base, it's huge. I know my team and my real estate business mostly deals with military relocation. And they need to have the knowledge coming into our area of what potential flooding could look like. You go to rent a place and you have no idea it floods there, or it floods in your car, your house, even if you're up on a higher floor in an apartment, you have no idea until it happens, and then you didn't even have the option to choose whether to live there or to choose insurance that might have helped you deal with it. So I think the information being presented right from the beginning as to your potential for flooding and where you choose to live is important, especially when you're buying a house. So that's some legislation that I still have that we've been working on, and putting that information into the disclosures that people get when they buy and rent.
Of course, that issue, Delegate Miyares, is an economic development issue. It's a public safety issue. To some extent, can be a national security issue with the Navy at the Port of Virginia.
No question. I mean, depending on the poll, anywhere between 30 to 40% of residents in Hampton Roads have reported just in the last year they've been delayed getting to work because of flooding issues. I mean, think of the economic impact of just missed work, missed wages that come with that impact. We are the most vulnerable area in the country for a catastrophic flooding or hurricane event. We're similar to where New Orleans was before Katrina, and so we have two things that we are trying to struggle with. One, we are statistically due for another Category 3 hurricane. We haven't had one since the 1940s, and we're statistically due for another one. The last time we got hit, we had 9 feet of water on Granby Street, and we were called Princess Anne County then. We had a population of less than 20,000 people. The economic impact of such a catastrophic flooding event like that, we dodge a bullet every year. The second is we have natural sea level rise that's happening. I mean, you look at the water gauge at Sewell's Point in Norfolk, and it is rising. And you look at the computer modeling of what will hit Norfolk in the next several decades, and you have about a third of Norfolk that literally will be underwater. So we have to tackle that. One of the pieces of legislation that I have introduced is the National Hurricane and Flooding and Bond Protection Act, because Moody's has actually said, Virginia, if you don't come up with a good flooding protection plan, we're going to downgrade your bonds. And as you know, in this building, our AAA bond rating is something that enables us to both be fiscally responsible and to borrow money responsibly for big projects. So this would make Virginia a non-federal sponsor. We would be able to work with the Army Corps of Engineers, which is really the only federal designee to work on these major flooding mitigation projects. The governor has appointed a wonderful new coastal resiliency officer. They have asked for time to review the legislation, which I'm fine with, and hopefully be able to have it again in the future next year after they just got appointed in October. But I think that's going to be a critical step, because for too long, and I think Kelly agrees with me, we've had this notion that flooding mitigation and tackling these huge problems is either a local problem or a DC problem. It's not a Richmond problem. And the Elizabeth River touches on multiple localities. We can't just depend on localities to tackle this, and DC seems to be completely dysfunctional. I think there has to be a huge role for Richmond to tackle this problem.
And of course, the way you traverse the tunnels and the bridges has been controversial over the last few years in terms of tolling for people.
Oh yeah, tolling I think is one of those where I think input is important from the public, but the overall infrastructure, going back to the overall, is something we need a bigger picture on. And regionalism, again, is where I feel like everything is headed to be, kind of a totality of everything. We need to look at the big picture and work with localities. And from what I've seen coming in, and as a freshman, I guess from last year, just seeing that regionalism already kind of forming. I'm not sure how it was before, but it seems like it really is productive. So.
What about the Port of Virginia, Delegate Miyares? How important is that to your area, but also to the Commonwealth?
It is the greatest unsung economic driver of the Commonwealth. Close to 10% of the entire state's GDP 10% is tied to the Port of Virginia, because of all the facilities, the trucking, and this goes far inland. I mean, the Port of Virginia goes actually past Richmond. And at least for our region, and as I speak to civic groups, it's true. I mean, globalization is a pretty scary proposition. I mean, it's a very disruptive force in our modern economy. But we're one of the few areas in Hampton Roads, because of the Port of Virginia, that we could take advantage of globalization. And these are blue-collar and white-collar jobs. And so I don't like to be second place at anything. Right now, we're depending on how you measure the tonnage, either second or third on the East Coast. The state of Georgia has done an enormous amount investing in their port. I'm glad to say that the last several administrations, including Governor Northam, have really been laser-like focused on reinvesting in the port. So we have made huge strides to get our exit time and getting that cargo off those ships and on our railroad tracks and on our trucks and out. And so and the dredging. I mean, we have these huge super container ships that are coming online that we could take advantage of. Mm-hmm. We are blessed with the best, in my opinion, best natural harbor in America, and I think we have the advantage of really taking advantage of that and taking the port to the next level.
So, Delegate Fowler, we need to maintain that competitive advantage. You talked about dredging. I know that port's being widened. He mentioned Georgia, Savannah. We've got Charleston and New York. So we have to make sure we continue those investments in the state of Virginia. Absolutely.
I was able to tour at the port. I went and toured because I really feel it's important to understand things in context, to understand how they work in the bigger picture. So after I was there at the tour, we were able to see kind of how it works, what it means to dredge and to be able to bring in those bigger cargo ships, because when you're able to bring in those, it depends on the routes they bring things in. And of course, I'm not an expert in that area, but being able to be like the number one focus and is going to do nothing but bring in jobs and kind of sustain our economy and give us that solid place here in Virginia. So
of course, we've got those post-Panamax ships coming in now, so that's the need for widening and dredging.
Right, and former governor of North Carolina, Governor McCreary, had actually said he wanted to make the Port of Virginia essentially the Port of North Carolina. And some of that means our transportation infrastructure. I mean, you had firms in Raleigh-Durham that were, because it was so hard to get to the Port of Virginia, shipping down to Georgia. And so Governor McCreary had announced that he wanted, it was called Interstate 87, they've changed the name, but really connecting Raleigh-Durham to Norfolk, and we're going to have to do our part when the time is appropriate. But there is so much future growth potential in the port, it's staggering, and our ability to both connect the North Carolina economy to our port and both bringing in products that are then shipped out and using Virginia Company and Virginia trucking businesses. It's really exciting to see what they're doing there.
Military is very important, obviously, in the Hampton Roads area. I know that you have some legislation dealing with tax exemptions.
Yeah, we have a couple of different bills. One, I had a constitutional amendment, and as you know, it's hard to amend the Constitution of Virginia. You have to pass it through both chambers of the House and the Senate, and then election, and then another legislation that passes both the House and the Senate, and then a referendum, and then on top of that, then you have to have the bill that codifies it. So I had a constituent that came to, I practice law when I'm not here, real estate law, and had a constituent that said, listen, I am the surviving spouse of a disabled veteran, and I'm told that I'm selling my home to downsize, and I'm getting hit with a tax bill. And we have 3 exemptions currently in the code, where if you're the surviving spouse of somebody who died in combat, surviving spouse of someone who was a first responder who died in the line of duty, and a surviving spouse of somebody who was 100% permanently disabled veteran, you don't have to pay property taxes. They had written the code incorrectly, where that exemption goes away if you moved. So this was it seemed like a minor wording, and sometimes it's just one word or two can completely change the law. It took a long process, and then I have another bill that's passed the finance subcommittee, and expect it'll be heard in full finance. That if you're that you're not going to be taxing your benefits if you're 100% service disabled veteran, and you're up to 100 for 50% of the federal poverty line. So this is really focused on those vets that are really struggling financially. I don't think the Commonwealth of Virginia should be taxing their retirement benefits. So I just think it's important for Virginia. We have the highest concentration of active duty military personnel of any area in the country. I think it's important that we just welcome and take care of our vets.
And Delegate Fowler, you come from a military family, and you're very familiar with the veterans in the Virginia Beach area. As you indicated earlier, you have helped veterans relocate when they come here. What other issues confront our veterans when they move to Virginia?
Well, I think one of the key things would be the military spouses unemployment. There's a big gap there with unemployment. We want people to get to work quicker when they come here. So I have 2 bills in for reciprocity for military spouses. Now, we already have some of that in the code, and there might be some things we need to work on with language, but we need to make it easier to get to work quicker. We do have some things on the code in the code already that allow us to expedite, but we need to kind of take away those hindrances for military spouses. That way they can come here and work quickly. So, and then the other thing is, I also wanted to say thank you for the constitutional amendment, because my grandmother, this was specific to her after my grandfather passed. And when the bill came last year and to talk about in privileges and elections for the amendment, it was one thing that the language is a little confusing, and I was able to speak on it and just clarify for the others and relate it to my grandmother. And it was it's interesting to see how that how that affects people's lives. It's huge. Yeah. It's huge.
Absolutely.
So.
And what about the program called Virginia Values Veterans? How does that help people in your district?
Well, I mean, I think in general, Virginia, and I think we have, Governor Northam is a veteran himself. He served in the Gulf War. I think in general, Virginia does some of the very best work possible for veterans. My personal gripe, and maybe future General Assemblies, and I could work with Kelly to get this done, is my big gripe is we don't treat our veterans the same we do, say, in North Carolina or Florida, where we tax their retirement benefits. And I know Kelly has probably heard, and I know individuals that they retire and they relocate because they don't want to get taxed. And so I'd love to find a way that Virginia and future General Assemblies can get that done. But this is an old institution. We're celebrating a big birthday this year, and I think it's helpful to sometimes you have to keep a long view, and it takes sometimes several years to work on a good idea is what I like to tell people.
And Delegate Fowler, what about veterans who are returning from theaters of war and have gained valuable experience that can be turned into a job opportunity? I think we are doing things like providing credit for people who are medics so that they can become EMTs, for example.
Oh, I think that's a great thing to kind of focus on is in the future. I don't think we do enough of that. I don't think we do enough of how we utilize their experience and apply it to the future. There is information out there, but I've had too many constituents reach out and ask for help about certain areas of, okay, they're retiring or they are being discharged, however they're leaving, and they don't know, the resources aren't clear. And I think that's another one of those, I keep going back to I keep finding that information presentation is one of our biggest issues. Is the resources are there, it's just how we present them is something that I would love to see an overhaul of in the future. To find those resources, and most military families usually are experts in it after a couple years, but there are missing some opportunities where there's programs out there to help them as they separate from the military, and we just need to make that information easily accessible. So I think that's something I'm not sure how to work on in the future, but it's something I've been bringing up more often. So
I want to take you back for a moment to the classroom and the kinds of things that have been integrated into our schools over the last 20 to 30 years, given gun violence in our schools. And now we have resource officers who are law enforcement, and their tendency is when they see a child being disruptive to refer that child to juvenile court, for example. Is that something that you saw, or is it something you think we need to deal with?
I think that we need to have some clarity on where, what we do about it when it happens. So I know I taught elementary, so it's a little different in the elementary world in reference, than the high school world. I know that there was some efforts this year with school safety that have really helped. So being a former teacher and my husband being law enforcement, I feel like I can really speak to some of the issues that the doors in Virginia Beach, them all being locked, has made a huge difference. It's just great to be able to go up to the school, have the resource officer, have whoever's at the front have to buzz you in, makes the world of difference because that attention is at the front. And those efforts in the petition signing were great. I'm so happy. People need to look to Virginia Beach as to our school safety and how we work. And I think that the resource officers, we're kind of in that, developing how we define and who does it, what their capacity is. We're kind of still in that world where they're trying to figure out, and I really hope we look to educators and the ones that are there and administrators as to what is working, and then how it, I know with parents, as a parent, I think, how does it make you feel going into school? And I know I feel so much safer going into the school, so.
And Delegate Miyares, there was that school safety committee that was set up, and there were a number of recommendations that came out of that committee. What recommendations, if any, are being implemented through legislation?
Well, there's a host of there's a whole package that we're looking at and that I think will become law. But I know, for example, in Virginia Beach, I think as an example is one of it is locking down the school. All three of my kids are in Virginia Beach public schools. I can't pick them up without having a video camera that identifies me and an ID at the front desk, and they have to buzz me in. And so that is completely different than my experience growing up, where essentially anybody can just walk in. I know one of the most important things is the telltale signs of these awful, tragic school shootings. Oftentimes there are signs of that this child is dealing with either bullying or mental disturbances, and empowering our human resources officers. But also we, in the code, we treat threats differently. I mean, if I text a teacher that I'm going to come in and commit violence in the school, that's treated as a felony. If I simply say that to you, it's treated a misdemeanor. So I think we need some clarity in the code and how serious. And I have talked to juvenile domestic relations judges, and they see a huge disparity. They think it's a gross disparity in how we treat these incidences. And sometimes the text message, they're treated as a felony, and then somebody can say the exact same words in a text message verbally and is treated as a misdemeanor. And so we are trying to get that clarity. I have some legislation this year that's trying to clarify that on on the verbal threats, how we treat that. And but we have made some great progress. I do think Virginia Beach in so many ways is a model for how the rest of the state can look in trying to solve and make our schools what they should be, which is a safe haven for our kids to learn and thrive.
Let's turn to the budget for a few moments, because that's always the defining issue in the General Assembly, because you're required by the Constitution to balance the budget. There's this huge issue around the tax cut out of Washington, D.C., and the potential windfall here, and the necessity to conform to the federal legislation to protect taxpayers. How do you think things are going to work out?
Well, I am no expert in taxes, first off, so I am very open to understanding both plans. I know they're still kind of being developed, and apparently there's two, but I'm wondering if there's going to be anything kind of comes out as like a side, like a shoot off of one of the other two plans. But I want to do what works for my district. So I think it's very important. We've pulled a lot of numbers as to how the plan or each plan would affect, or what we're kind of working on. I know they're kind of changing. So when those finally kind of get down to it, I'm going to be able to look at how each plan affects those in my district. If they're able to take the standard deduction, if they're able to itemize, and how it affects them. So I kind of looked at my taxes and I'm like, I wish I could do them both ways and kind of as like a model. But yeah, we've been pulling numbers and trying to make sure we have a full understanding of what is best for my district.
And Delegate Miyares, the time is very short. I think by the end of the month, forms have to go out to people, at least on the state level, and there's this big issue about what's going to happen with the earned income tax credit.
That's the big debate. I mean, the governor would like to see the change of the federal tax code, which limits deductions, that additional, basically as a tax hike, be funneled as an earned income tax credit. There's people on my side of the aisle feel like, well, no, this should be we don't want to raise taxes in the middle class. We're looking at close to 750,000 people that would have a middle class tax hike. My feeling in my gut is at some point there will be some type of compromise. I'm not sure what they'll look at. I know there's probably some discussions in the House leadership with the Senate and with the governor. But to your point, what you said, Woody, we aren't Washington. We cannot kick the can down the road. And D.C. is Exhibit A of fiscal mismanagement. I mean, they borrow 41 cents out of every dollar they spend. We don't have that option. We balance our budget every year. We do it very responsibly. We're consistently rated one of the best fiscally managed states in the country. I think because we're not a kick the can down the road kind of legislature, we have to get it done. Something will get done before the end of February. But I am starting to get a lot of calls from both constituents and accountants. And I tell them we are trying to get something worked out, and we'll get something worked out, I'm confident, by the end of February.
Well, thank you both for being here. Delegate Kelly Convirs-Fowler, Delegate Jason Miyares. Good to see you both. Good luck the rest of the session.
Thanks, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.